shit.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
I have these Post-it notes that I put in front of my monitor, and I read them every morning, and it just to kind of reassure myself. Like, for example, I have one Post-it note that says, trust, believe, and persevere. Always use logic rather than emotion. Be kind, be civil, be courteous, be good, be humble. For me, those are things that are important because I want to have a good relationship with my clients. I want to have a good relationship with my opposing counsel if I can. But at the same time, I want to do things on my own terms in the sense of moving the ball forward, but also be positive in the sense of being a good person in society. And just, for me, it's like trust yourself, believe in yourself, and persevere. And also surround yourself with people that are your cheerleaders, that will stand up for you and will help you cut all the people that are toxic out of your life. That's my message to folks out there.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Jesus Torres, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Jesus.
Hey, Merle, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a great Friday, great weather, and happy to be on the show with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. We met I do everything in before pandemic. we met before the pandemic, and I really was appreciative of who you are and your story and what you've done. And I'm so glad that I'm doing this podcast, and it occurred to me to ask you to sit down with me. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm very happy to share my story and hopefully inspire and motivate others, because people of color need to support one another and unite. And if there's anything that I can do to help in that cause, I'm all for it.
Awesome. So let me tell the audience a little bit about you. Jesus is a trial attorney who attended McGeorge School of Law and Cal State Northridge undergrad. Um, you've been a lawyer for 22 years. You've spent about half of that in big law. Two of the firms on the defense side, two of the firms were Shook Hardy and Alston and Bird. I think when we met, you were at Alston and Bird. Um, and for about a year and a half now, you have made a switch to the plaintiff side, and you're now at the Wilshire Law Firm. And it's just fascinating to me that you've made that switch successfully, that you made it at all, really, because I think it's not that common. But just was hoping to share with folks what that's like. The other thing I want to point out is that you are a member of the Simi Valley Rotary Club, and spend your time working on poverty alleviation, and also a member of the Hispanic Business Committee for the Simi Valley Chamber of Commerce. And I just found out you're a sports car enthusiast, and we have Porsches in common. So we have a lot to talk about. What did I miss, Jesus?
No, you nailed it. You got everything there. You did a good job there. But the Porsche thing, we do have to spend a little time on that.
Okay. Well, let's get to that a little later. So The way I like to start, the conversation is to have you do a little storytelling. And I know you're a trial lawyer, so you should be very good at that. And give us an idea, kind of walk us through your life and where you're from, um, who helped you get where you are, who inspired you. Was there anybody in particular? And also, how did you decide to go to law school?
Absolutely. Well, as you said, my name's Jesus Torres, and I was born and raised in Oxnard, California. Oxnard, California is a farming community, and my parents came from Zacatecas, Mexico, in 1968. Prior to that, my grandfather had come to Oxnard, which where my parents finally ended up staying and still are there. Uh, during World War II, as part of the Bracero program, at the time there were a lot of American citizens that were going to the war, and they needed workers from Mexico to, work the fields and kind of step in and help out with labor shortages. So my grandfather came and was part of that program, and since he had been working there, he was able to, bring his family here, and that he brought my mother, and at the time my parents were married, so both of them resided here later on in 1968. And I grew up with three brothers and two sisters. My parents were both farm workers when they came here, and they retired as farm workers. But my father also was a truck driver and a mechanic. He went to a vocational school and did some mechanics. So during the time when I was about in junior high, he started doing his own mechanic work at home. So I ended up helping him with some of that work, and also I also worked in the farm industry myself, growing up at the age of 12, and I was picking strawberries from age 12 to about 14.
Wow.
I would go in with my brothers and sisters before we started school. We'd get there at 4:30 in the morning, and then we'd leave at 7:30, and then we'd go to school after that. And it was, we were a poor family. We grew up in the neighborhood we were in was about 90% Hispanic, and they were mostly farm working families that were there. I went to all my elementary schools, junior high, and even high school were predominantly Latino high school students and people. So I really didn't get a good view of what other cultures were like until I went to college.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as one of my biggest heroes and mentors is my dad, because he worked so hard. I always tell people, if you ever want to know who my dad is, just shake his hand. And his hands are just, you could tell he's a blue collar guy, and he's got big hands, and you know that he's worked a rough life.
Wow.
And so as far as, the law school portion of it, or I guess the beginnings of it, there was an experience I had growing up. I was about 11 years old, and my parents were saving money to buy a home, because we were living in, really rundown homes and government housing. And they got into it with a unscrupulous realtor, and my parents both invested all their hard-earned money into putting a down payment on a home with this person, and this person ended up swindling my parents.
Oh no.
It was like their entire life savings, and I will never forget, my dad and my mom just crying. And my dad's the toughest guy I know, and I rarely saw him cry. And when I saw him, it just really was very hard for me and very traumatic. And, at that age, you're not understanding what's going on. And later I found out what happened. And at that point in time, we really didn't have anybody to help us out. It cost money to get lawyers. And so my parents ended up taking a loss. But at the end of the day, my parents persevered and just restarted. And
Wow.
that included myself and my brothers. We all, worked. Everything that we earned went to our parents. Um, and it was just a matter of surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, that was kind of, I think, the first time I started thinking of like, man, I want to do something with my life where I can help people like my parents, because this is something that I don't want to happen to anybody else. And then later on, I got into during high school. My first job in high school was working at Wendy's flipping burgers, and I saw a lot of folks that I was working with that were the same age as my parents working alongside me, earning the same amount, which was minuscule. And I told myself, like, I don't want to be doing this at their age.
Right.
And in high school too, the thing that kind of kept me out of trouble, and my parents were very strict, you're real strict Mexican Catholic family, was one, to come home and don't go out in the streets, because I lived, in a bad neighborhood with gangs and drugs and all that. But one thing that kept me out of trouble was working and playing sports. So I played baseball and football. And I owe, that to my parents, keeping me away. I still had to be around these folks because I ran into them in the streets, and I also ran into them in school. But they understood that, I was busy doing the work and I wasn't in that scene, but I was still around it. I mean, I remember one time going to the park and seeing, a dead body
Mm-hmm.
on the ground. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just not a good environment to be in. And in high school, I was, I experienced having two friends be shot and killed
Mm-hmm.
at parties because of the gang affiliations. There were friends of mine. There were people who I grew up with, but still, at that point in time in high school, I'm thinking, man, like, do I want to end up like those guys, or do I want to, do something with my life? So at that point, I told myself I'm going to start working hard on my education and try to, go to community college and go from there. And so I went to my high school guidance counselor, and that's where I kind of hit a brick wall. It,
Interesting.
because I wanted to be a professional. I kind of told him, I wanted to get into college, and at the time, my brothers, were going to Cal State Northridge as engineers, and I figured, hey, I'd jump in, be an engineer, and do that. That's what my parents wanted me to be, and follow the footsteps of my brothers. And my guidance counselor pretty much told me, you know what, like, he was steering me more towards vocational
Hmm.
jobs. And I'm not afraid to say that my counselor at the time was Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like, in his mind, I wasn't good enough to go to college, and he felt that I should be doing blue collar work. And so that really turned me off, and I stopped going to him, because other students had different experiences with their counselors, and they were getting the help that they needed. I later found out that other people that had the same guidance counselor that I had were getting the same story. So I just ignored this. I did my best at school. I kept my nose out of trouble. I worked, and then um, I applied to college, and I got in. I got into Cal State Northridge. I was there for about a year as an engineer major, and then I decided to change my major because it wasn't what I wanted to do. Because growing up, I'm thinking, you know what, like I'm not a math guy, I'm not a science guy. I'm doing this because my parents wanted me to do this, but I took some political science classes, I took some Chicano studies classes and some history classes, and I really enjoyed and thrived in those classes. And one thing that really touched me was it took me to go to college to learn, the bad history in the United States. You
Mhm.
know, growing up, you go to elementary school, you go to, high school, and they give you the watered down version of what history was like. Um, but they don't tell you about the racism, about all the things that happen to people of color.
And
They
now
get,
they want to get rid of it altogether, right?
yeah, and to me, it's going backwards. And the thing is, we're still not at a point in our society where people of color have equality. And one of the things that I learned, for example, I didn't know that when Dodger Stadium was being built, that they displaced a whole Latino community
Mhm.
to build a stadium there. And they did this by eminent domain. And at the time, the politicians were already in cahoots with the owner of the Dodgers at the time and said, "Don't worry, we're going to get you this land. We're going to give it to you, and we're going to get rid of these folks that are here." And they changed the narrative to show that, oh, these people are communist. They are, folks, trying to scare the public. Oh, we need to get rid of these folks and get them out.
Well, the
And
same thing, I just found out recently the same thing happened with the 10 freeway. But it was for the Black community. There was a very thriving upper middle class Black community going through where West Adams is now. And they totally uh, 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 tore down that whole community to put the freeway through for the same reasons.
yeah, and nobody talks about that, and that leaves scars. I mean, that leaves for the people that are there, and there's still people that are alive from that era that were displaced and tell their stories still. And I mean, the other thing is we look at all these civil rights legislations that were happening during the 60s, and we have this constitution. And one of my favorite, or should I say, people that inspired me during college was Malcolm X. um, he's a person who had a evolution in his life to a point where he went from one extreme of being in a nation of Islam and being a black nationalist to uh, evolving to a true Muslim and embracing folks, because Islam is brotherhood.
Hmm.
And he spoke his mind. He was not scared to say what was on his mind. And one of the things that resonated with me was him is like, if the Constitution says everything's equal, then why do we need these amendments? Why do we need legislation to have voting rights? Why do we need a legislation to have civil rights? If everything was equal, then we wouldn't need any of these laws. So
Agreed. So did you go? Did you choose to go to law? Well, I'll tell you we have a few things in common in addition to our love for Porsches. But I grew up in Compton. I almost went to a party across the street where a guy got shot and killed. And I saw his brain on the street. I started USC as an engineering major, and quickly changed uh, to because I think that's one of the your doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher are things that people of color are pushed to. but did you, you know, I don't even remember at this point how I decided to go to law school, but was it all these things? Was it the Malcolm X? Was it the displacement of Latino people, the situation that your parents went through? Was it a culmination of all those things that ultimately got you to decide to go to law school, or was there something else?
Yeah, I mean, it was a culmination of all these things, because for me, like, I initially got into political science because I wanted to get either into politics and, help my community, or get into public administration, work within, the municipalities and try to work at the local level and better the, environment for minorities. But then when I graduated, I took um, 3 years off before I went to law school because at the time my father injured himself and he couldn't work. And when I was in university, my brother took time off so that I could finish school. And then once I finished, he went to university. So I took 3 years off so he could finish his degree. And during that time, I interned with the city of Oxnard's uh, city manager's office because I wanted to get a look-see of what it's like working at a municipality and also seeing how local politics work. And I also worked at a law firm after that to see what it's like working at a law firm, just to kind of, figure out,
Mhm.
what I wanted to do. But at the end of the day, I wanted to go into politics and maybe, or even in public administration, or even be a lobbyist. So when I was with the interning with the city of Oxnard, um, they um, had me go to Sacramento, and I was able to attend, a state of the state uh, proceeding that they had up there, and all the mayors from all these different cities were in this room. They were talking about all these issues that were going on in their communities, and it was kind of eye-opening because they were all giving out all these different um, ideas of what's wrong in their cities, but also what they're trying to improve. And I got a chance to meet a couple of lobbyists that were there, and I asked them what they were doing, and they told me at that point, like, because I was asking a lot of good questions, and they seemed like I was really into it. So they said, "Hey, you should probably go to law school and
Got it.
go get a degree there." And they told me McGeorge, which is in Sacramento, they have a governmental affairs program there, and they get a lot of their interns and their fill positions of jobs there with a lot of law students from there. And not all law schools have a governmental affairs program that's specific to like a state assembly, state senate, and whatnot. So I go to McGeorge and I start taking some child advocacy classes as electives. I had all these other classes I was taking. And once I started doing trial advocacy, I got hooked because I was able to stand in front of a judge, in front of a jury, and I was representing, fictional clients, some of which were disenfranchised. And then I did, criminal. We did all different kinds of cases. And so I decided to change my emphasis to trial. So
Okay.
and then once I did that, I ended up going to getting an internship with the Sacramento District Attorney's Office, and became a certified law student with a district attorney overseeing me do cases. So I was actually doing the stuff. I would go in front of a judge. I would
Wow.
argue motions. Most of the time, there were suppression motions, illegal searches, that kind of stuff. And then they do let you do a lot of the arraignments. You get a lot of information. I mean, a lot of cases related to different crimes. You have misdemeanors, felonies, and there's a hodgepodge of, okay, here's domestic violence, here's grand theft, autos, here's murders and whatnot.
Wow.
And so I
So
got
let me ask you this. You did all that and you graduated from law school and you worked for a few firms first, but you ended up in big law. How did that happen?
okay, that's an interesting story because given the schools that I went to, um, none of them,
Interviewed
as
at your
far as
school.
as far as big law is concerned, none of the big law firms would even look at my resume because of where I went to law school.
Right.
And so I ended up working at a small insurance defense firm, and at this defense firm, they basically were kind of like the DA's office, where they would give you the file, you work it up, it's trial by fire. You go in, you argue the motion, okay, let's go to trial. You go ahead and you're second chairing, and then eventually get first chair. But I took so many depositions, I argued so many motions, and it just was something that I learned on the fly, that some that the type of training I wouldn't get in law school.
Right.
So it wasn't until I worked on a big product liability case. It was a toxic tort case where um, there was a plaintiff who was suing for he had gotten non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was a person who did body work and painted cars. And the plaintiff's allegations were that he got this non-Hodgkin's lymphoma because he was exposed to all these chemicals that he used, oils, adhesives, paints, thinners, you name it. And so he ends up suing every single manufacturer of product that he worked with. And he worked at like 30 different body shops, which was very challenging. And so we had to, ask him questions about the use of these products, and when and where and how often, who used them around, whether he could identify the products.
And so
And
you learned how to depose people and how
oh
to.
yeah, oh yeah. So I learned. So I'm in a room full of, like, there's about 30 lawyers in this conference room that have to ask questions of this particular plaintiff, and this plaintiff is also a Spanish speaker. So and what made it extra difficult was we had a translator. So this deposition actually lasted 25 days.
Wow.
So at the time I was representing PPG, who is a paint manufacturer based out of Pittsburgh, and that's one of the paints that he used. And so my job was to ask him questions about what, could he tell me what brand or what the product looked like, how often he used it, how often people used it. And there was like a bunch of different body shops he used it at. So I was able to strip down, his use to, like, it was de minimis and he couldn't remember. And the hard part for me was this person that I was deposing reminded me of my father. He was, didn't have my father only had like a third grade education, so he wasn't sophisticated, he wasn't articulate. But I had a client that I had to defend, even though, they were a big client.
Right.
And so during this deposition, and after I was done with my questioning, an attorney from Alston and Bird came over and said, "Hey man, can I talk to you for a second?" So I said, "Sure." So he walked over, and he's a partner at Alston and Bird, and he said, "Man, you just saved me a lot of time and effort, and I mean, because he represented DuPont, which was another paint
Wow.
manufacturer. And so I was able to get rid
Do
of,
his job for
yeah,
him.
I basically did everything for him
Right.
and kind of show that he really wasn't around paint that whole lot. And we were both, after we were done, he had a couple of questions to ask, but I pretty much like did the job, and we did enough to be able to file motions for summary judgment and get them granted. And he came over to me and said, "Hey, we're looking for some lawyers. Are you interested in, making a move? Are you happy where you're at?" And I'm like, I said, "Look, you're at Alston and Bird. I mean, there's no way you guys would even look at me." He's all, "Don't worry. I have some pull and I know some people and we can make it happen if you're interested." And I just at that point was shocked. I'm like, "Oh shoot, like this is not because normally when you do big law, you come in and it's a summer and then you do your
Right.
years and then they give you an offer." So I was more of a lateral. And so I came in and I said, "Why not?" So I jumped in, and it was the first time I've had to interview in panels where I had, we had a panel in LA, I had a panel in Atlanta because that's where the flagship was. And what made this job easy for me to get was Lisa Guilford. She she's now at Sidley,
Yeah.
but Lisa Guilford to me is like you were asking, who are those people that helped you out in your career? She was one of them. And we met for lunch. We talked. She asked me about my background, and she was really into my whole,
Story.
my whole story. And then we, and then Peter, the partner that was there, kind of also told her what I had done and whatnot. And at the time, they had recently gotten a class action lawsuit that were defending against Toyota. So they needed people that, had a lot of depot experience and that could go in and take a bunch of depots on the fly. And at the time, the Toyota class action case was, and I still think it was the largest class action lawsuit, economic lawsuit, ever, because
So let me ask you this. So that's a very inspiring story because, a lot of folks, contact us as recruiters who have backgrounds like yours, who have the schools and, didn't go to Harvard or Yale or USC or UCLA or whatever, and are trying to figure out how to break in. And I think your story is one. Obviously, it was fortuitous. There's always a lot of luck, right? But it's like you had opportunities that were presented to you, and you always took them.
Yes, absolutely. You never want to look back at an opportunity and say, you know, if, what if? I always want to look back and say, you know what, I did it, I tried it, and it worked out or it didn't work out. But if I wouldn't have taken the opportunity, it'd always be in the back of my mind saying, I wonder what would have happened if I would have taken that job. And
Right.
even though I was happy where I was at, but they made me an offer, and and that was an intimidating thing too, thinking like, oh, I go to this big law firm. I'm all these guys that are there are all like Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley. So I was already intimidated in that sense. But one thing I realized really quickly was a lot of these lawyers that are partners at this firm, like, or at least a lot of the younger partners, they barely had any deposition experience
Mm-hmm.
and barely had any, experience arguing motions, in court. And that's something that I did from day one at this small insurance defense firm. So I was comfortable with it, and I was, good with taking depositions and getting information. And so a lot of times, they wanted to see what I could do. And little by little, they saw what I could do, and they were sending me to all, these depositions and hearings, and winning them and getting good information for our defenses on a lot of these cases. But like I said, Lisa Guilford was the one that really inspired me and mentored me. She brought me into what was called the DuPont Minority Corporate Counsel. DuPont had this program where they had a bunch of firms that they worked with across the country that were, and primarily just minority attorneys. And every time they had an event, or not just with DuPont, but any events that I would attend, Lisa would always walk up to everybody and introduce me and say, "Hey, this is Jesus Torres. He's my future partner."
Wow. So she was not only a mentor, but she was a sponsor.
Exactly. She was my cheerleader. She was there, singing my praises. Um, there was a time there was a summary judgment that I won where they were seeking $25 million in punitive damages. And I remember being at a dinner, we were sitting down, she gets up, "Hey, y'all know that Jesus over here saved $25 million case. He got a summary judgment." And, the client is like super happy. And I was just like on the spot, like, wow, like I've never had anybody kind of like do that for me. And a lot of times in big law, there are a lot of lawyers you work with, and they want to take the credit.
Take the credit,
But
right?
she was the opposite. She's the one that said, "Hey, he did this, he did that. He settled that case for minimal amount of money." But it was Lisa Guilford who really, really took me under her wing. And not only that, the one thing that I've realized with big law firms too is they have so many resources and so many things that other firms don't have. And one of the things that they put me in was they had, for their newer attorneys that wanted to take advantage, is they had these coaching professionals. So if you wanted to go work with a coaching professional to help you in your career, to help motivate you, to help come up with a plan, to see where you'll be in 5 years, to do things like that. And that's where my second person who was there for me helped me motivate me and, help me get my confidence being at a big firm. Her name is Amy Mallow. And
Oh,
she at the time I met her, it was funny because it felt like a therapist, patient relationship. And she met me and she's like, "So, why don't tell me about yourself?" And I told her, gave her my background, and I told her of my anxieties of working at a big law firm because I'm not the typical big law firm candidate. And she pretty much just said, "Look, if you're working there, it's because you're good. I mean, they're not going to hire somebody because you're not. And you have what it takes. And I mean, right now, what are some things that you want to focus on, that you want to improve on, that you'd like to do?" And I told her, and then she would say, "Okay, let's set up a plan. Let's do this." And they also had resources where I could help improve my writing. So I had these people at Alston that help a lot of attorneys improve their writing. So you get those less red lines from the partners and whatnot, when you're turning in your memo or your motions and whatnot. So that really helped. But Amy was really good because I saw her at least twice a month, and she would always pick me up when I felt down. And then she would tell me like, "Well, tell me what you did. Tell me some things you did that were great for the firm." And I would tell her, and she's like, "Well, you should celebrate that. That's great."
well, can I tell
Um,
you this? We have this in common also. Amy used to work for us.
oh, really?
Yeah, Amy was a recruiter here. She's great, and she's back into career coaching now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you spent 11 years in big law, and a year and a half ago you decided to make the switch to the plaintiff side. And I have to tell you, I remember because my husband is a insurance defense lawyer and and a trial lawyer, and I remember him coming home one day and saying, "Yeah, I was in court. The there were these lawyers in court waiting for for their case, and these were the best dressed guys I've ever seen. He was like, these guys were sharp. And so, and I said, really? And he's like, yeah, they were at this firm called the Wilshire Law Firm. And I'll never forget that. And so I have to ask you, coming from big law and going to not only one of the best plaintiffs attorneys, but apparently the best dressed plaintiffs attorney firm, have you had to up your fashion game?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good thing was I already had a fashion game
Okay,
coming
okay.
in. So I mean, I that's one thing I pride myself in is my appearance, and because you meet people once, and you always want to make a good first impression, even if it's with what you're wearing. But what really spawned me from going from big law to plaintiff's work was while I was at both firms, Alston and Shook Hardy, I did a lot of pro bono work, and I worked a lot with individuals that were either seeking asylum. There were folks that had the one that I remember, and she's from Compton. She was a client, and they committed fraud on her. A person went in and filed recorded a fake deed giving this person power of attorney over this property, and they had a notary that was in on this fraud, so it looked legit. And so they took out a loan on her house that was fully paid off, and then she gets a foreclosure notice, unless she pays $350,000 on the house.
Oh my goodness.
We got that case through public counsel, and I jumped on it right away. We sent cease and desist letters to all the title companies and all the folks saying that there's fraud committed. We then filed a lawsuit to cancel the deeds. And not only that, we opened up a criminal investigation with the district attorney's office. So we had help from the police to find these folks, because this was a huge theft. And this was an elderly African-American lady who had no money other than her home. And I just felt like, I got to help this lady. I got to get her house back. And she was a wreck. That's all she had was his home. And then she had some siblings that had passed away recently, so she kind of felt all alone. And for me, it just felt like I got to do something. So long story short, we ended up getting enough evidence to get the deeds canceled and get her full title on the house.
Nice.
And she didn't have to pay where she had her house in fee simple. It's all hers. There's nothing on it. And then we got new deeds, drafted and put in her name. And this was all done by the court's order. And so after it was all done, and again, pro bono, as you know, is free. And I enjoyed it. And she came out to me and gave me this huge hug after it was all done. And she literally picked me up, hugged me and picked me up. And I was thinking, gosh, like, she's strong for an elderly lady. But anyway, for me, it was, I got so much excitement and joy out of representing her for nothing, that I basically also changed her life in a way.
Yeah.
And to me, that felt great. And so I ended up doing some more pro bono cases. I represented a twin girls from El Salvador whose parents had died in El Salvador, so they were kind of being taken care of by their elderly grandparents, one of which was mute and blind, and the other one, they could barely take care of themselves. But during the time that they were there, there was a lot of crime. It was rampant. Both girls were raped. And they had an uncle that was here in the United States. So there was a situation where we can do a SIGIS, which is special immigrant juvenile status, at least to get them status here in the United States to stay. And we went through that process. We met with a lot of folks in El Salvador, got a lot of information, got experts, psychological experts, mental health experts to testify and provide declarations. And we were able to get them visas to come and work and stay in the United States. And this was about 5 years ago. They've now graduated high school. And I remember when we had gotten the order saying that they could stay and that they had this, one of the twin girls came up to me and she pulled out a $50 bill to give to me. And I
What?
said, "What's that?" She's like, "Here, this is for," I go, "No, no. You know what? Use that money so you guys can go celebrate, have a nice dinner somewhere. But to me, the fact that I was able to do this for you and change, the trajectory of where you're going now is payment enough."
Right.
And they just started to cry, and they came up and they gave me a hug too. And I was just like, wow, like this means so much more to them than it was to me in the sense, here I am doing my pro bono work, but I just at that point I started realizing like an epiphany saying, wow, like this is a big deal.
And
And then
so and so, so that was 5 years ago. How did you just was it a situation where the Wilshire Law Firm came up to you again? Like had happened, they saw you in court, or did you ultimately just make a decision, I'm gonna make this switch and I'm gonna find a place to do it?
So yeah, after having these experiences with the pro bono clients, I decided I wanted to represent people. And I started looking at places where I could work, and I wanted to work at top tier plaintiff law firms, and I wanted to work at law firms that tried cases. And so at the time when I was looking, it was just Wilshire was looking for lawyers, and I submitted my resume. Um, they called me right away, and their recruiter set up a meet and greet, and he was just ecstatic that I spoke Spanish,
Mm,
that I really, because the majority of the clients here are Hispanic and speak Spanish. So when you have a lawyer that can talk to them and look like them, they're more trustworthy of them.
mhm.
And so we we got off on a great start once I got here, and they realized that I worked on bet the company type of cases, so they put me on some big heavy cases here. And since I've been here, it's been a little over a year now. I've had, in total about $20 million worth of settlements.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And and a lot of that too is, because it's great because once they see me go in and do my work, these insurance defense lawyers know, oh, this dude knows what he's doing.
Right.
And I do the one thing they don't like is when I do electronic discovery requests, for
Mhm.
ESI. That's something we do a lot on the defense side. I mean, when I was in big law, but it's not something that's really done a lot by a lot of plaintiff firms because they're not used to it. So when you do this discovery and you find out, like, you can download their servers, their phones, and you get all this information, and we have the resources to pay for that and do that, I'm able to find stuff that they don't want to let out and say, you know what, I could have the worst case on earth, but if they have information that's like really bad that is relevant that gets out, then they'll settle
So we don't
instead of.
have a whole lot of time left. Let's talk about, so we've heard, I mean, it's a very compelling story from your childhood to now. It is extremely compelling, and I think it's very informative for people who may be similarly situated. for you. And so I'm really happy, we've been able to hear that. Let's talk about what you do for fun. And let's talk about, I know you have kids. Um, what you hope that they do with their lives. And so talk to me about, cars or whatever it is that where you find joy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. One is cars. I grew up modifying cars with my dad, fixing cars. At the time when I was in high school, it was muscle cars, and then later got into European cars, modifying those. And on my free time, I go to a racetrack and just race around the
Mm.
track to beat my times.
Do you
The
take
thing,
do you take a Porsche? Because I have
yeah,
a friend. So I have a friend who races, and he keeps trying to get me to take my Porsche out there, and I'm like, I'm not taking my Porsche on a track. Are you kidding
yeah,
me?
I take my Porsche out there because I know my car. I know I know how much I should downshift and brake. Um, and I'll never drive anybody else's car in a track that I've never driven before. Since I know my car good and I know how it handles and I know where to push the limits, I feel more comfortable going around on the track.
Mm-mm.
And for me, it's kind of like an adrenaline rush. I can't go out and play football and baseball like I could, but this is something that I can do until I'm 80. The other thing I recently got into was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. About a last September, I got into it, and it's been a great thing for me physically and mentally. And I enjoy doing that. Now, as far as my children are concerned, I just moved up my youngest, uh, University of Washington. Uh, he's going to study computer science, so he's up there. We moved him in last
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we moved him in last week. We spent the week up in Washington, and he's psyched. He's, like I said, computer science, and his cousin also goes to the same schools, but he's a mechanical engineer. My
So
other
the engineering.
Yeah, the engineering's part of it. Yeah, and then my oldest son, he's going to school to be a chef, so he's in the
Wow.
culinary area. Yeah. One thing I told my kids, I didn't want to pressure them into doing what I do. I want them to find their own path and their own way, because I want them to be happy. I didn't want them to get in the same boat where my parents told me where to go.
Yeah.
So I want them to find themselves and do it, and then I'll be there to support them in any way. But the other thing, the challenging part for them too is, they're mixed race kids. My wife is Korean,
Mm.
and they've had some challenges, as far as experiencing racism, um, in schools, things of that nature. But
And
we
is that
try.
is that from other Latino kids? Is it from Korean kids? I mean, I think that's interesting.
It's from all kids. Um, it's from Latino kids. It's from Asian kids. It's from white kids. A lot of times, they think a lot. Most of the time, people think our kids are either Filipino or Hawaiian. But
Mm.
when they find out, like, oh, they see us pick up the kids, we're at baseball or whatever when they were younger, um, they would call them like hybrids or mutants or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's something that's also, changing in society. We're starting to become a society of a lot of folks that have mixed races. I mean, um, it's just the way our society is here, and they're going to confront different issues that I confronted and my wife confronted, um, because, like, for example, when I went to the orientation for my son at University of Washington, they had an affinity club session for the parents. And so I said, well, how do you
Which one
deal
do I
with
go to?
yeah, how do you deal with kids that are of mixed heritage? You have one that's half, like, for example, my son is half Mexican, half Korean, and I mean, you have all these different affinity groups, like, and they were stumped on with that
Right.
question. No, nobody had ever asked them that question, And, we're in an auditorium full of parents, so I kind of like wanted to help them. So I said, well, how about, is it possible for my son to be part of both the Latino affinity groups for college and the Asian group? And
Mhm.
then the speaker said, oh, yes, yes, they can do anything. In fact, like all our affinity groups here are open to all students. And you don't have to be from a certain race or anything. Everybody's open. Even Caucasian kids can be part of it. Anybody that wants to be an ally or support. And I'm like, okay. So in that sense, it was kind of like a new thing. And there's a lot of kids out there that are mixed race. So um, I just wanted to see what they had there for my son.
Right. That's very interesting. And that's something that our society is really struggling with, these days, right? Where, not, we won't go into politics, but that's a political, it's been brought into the political for, and also, try where politically they've been, you know, challenging DEI and getting rid of affinity groups and all that kind of stuff. And from your perspective, it sounds like even when you were at the big firm that affinity groups and special programs, were very important to your success.
They were, especially at Shook, Hardy and Bacon. I was the co-chair of their employment resource group for the Latino employees.
Hmm.
That was a great thing, and they had an employee resource group for like veterans, for first generation, for Asians, for African Americans, for veterans. So it was a really good collection of folks to feel included. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed when I was I miss being at Chicardi and Bacon. That was one of the things I enjoyed.
Hmm.
The affinity groups and all that, they were really big on it, especially after George Floyd. um, but I think there's a lot of work still needs to be done in that arena. um, but again, I'm at a firm now where we're more majority minority than a majority. So that's one of the things that I like being about here. Everybody I'm around, is a different race, different. It's just you feel like this is our society. This is our world.
So you found a home. You've come home. It sounds like.
I have, and to me, like representing folks and getting them justice they need and deserve. And I'm glad that I was able to get great training at Alston and Bird and Chicardi and Bacon, to allow me to parlay that into my side, because now I know the defense playbook. I know what they're going to say. I know how they're going to argue. I know what themes and theories they're going to say at trial, and reverse them against them and use that against them. I can get in front of court and say, I worked on that side for 20 years, and I'm going to tell you what they're going to say before they even open their mouths. They're going
Wow.
to say it was my client's fault. They're going to say this. They're going to blame user error, everything to escape responsibility.
So
And
so so let me, we're pretty much out of time. And I could talk to you and listen to your story so much longer, but we only have so much time. Can you give the audience just some words of advice and from your lived experience about, I guess, finding a passion, doing what makes you feel good, basically how you can do well, financially by doing good. Because it sounds like to me you figured that out.
yeah, if I can, I have these post-it notes that I put in front of my monitor, and I read them every morning, and it just to kind of reassure myself. Like, for example, I have one post-it note that says trust, believe, and persevere. Um,
Mm,
Always use logic rather than emotion. Be kind, be civil, be courteous, be good, be humble. Um, for me, those are things that are important because I want to have a good relationship with my clients. I want to have a good relationship with my opposing counsel if I can. But at the same time, I want to do things on my own terms in the sense of moving the ball forward, but also be positive in the sense of being a good person in society. And just, you know, for me, it's like trust yourself, believe in yourself and persevere. And also surround yourself with people that are your cheerleaders, that will stand up for you and will help you cut all the people that are toxic out of your life. That's my message to folks out there.
Awesome. And you know what? What you just said is proof that you have found your authenticity. You've leaned into your authenticity, and it is and has, and it continues to pay off for you.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you so much, Jesus, for being here to BS with me today. And thanks to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.